Yeah, Beth. I said to him that I would do a Q&A this week. I know, the suckers. And they actually believe me. Wait. No. What do you mean? I'm contractually obligated to do one of these every year on February the 2nd? No, it can't be. Your subscribers are in revolt? They're planning an uprising if you don't do a Q&A? Good. Do it. Take my stream. And take this Q&A while you're at it. You don't deserve it, but I'll give it to you anyway because you've been good little boys and girls and other non-binary genders. Okay. Subscriber Q&A. I've split this into 3 portions. There's a general portion where people ask me nonsense questions. Some of which actually are really funny but didn't make it in because they were all variations on the same theme of like, Sideshow. It is 2063. How are you? Or, Sideshow, just letting you know that the elm tree we grew on your grave is going well. I mean, some of them got very dark, but they were pretty good anyway. So, a general segment of the subscriber Q&A. Second segment is about Overwatch. Third segment is about the Overwatch League itself. And the fourth segment is about work. Did I say it was 3 segments? I lied to you. There's 4. So, without further ado, let's get cracking. Let's get questioning, shall we? The problem with these videos, by the way, is that no one watches them because there's such a large collection of answers that they can't be bothered to go through it all. So if you are interested in any specific answer, you can find the timestamps down below, and that will be a much better viewing experience for you because some of these you won't give a shit about the answers, but some of them you'll think are awesome. So do that instead. Okay, first 2 minutes of the video intro, now the questions. We're going to start with a couple from babybwu because she's the most prolific asker of questions in the Discord server. First one, do your parents wish you were more famous or less famous? This, I think, is a weird question because I don't think my parents think about me in any sense. Like, fame is it's not even a scale, right? Like, it's not even an applicable label in any sense. But I also, that my sisters have said sometimes, I wish you wouldn't tell stories about me, for example, when I deliberately pooed myself. You know, small things like that, where they don't really appreciate how much how many people consume my content, I suppose. And the other part of this, I think it's quite cute and a little naive as well, that my parents know that I've been living in North America, living in Los Angeles for, 3 years at this point, 2018, 19, and 2020. They know that there's, thousands of fans that tune in to the broadcast to watch and stuff like that. But when I went home, I think in 2019, so after 2 years of being in the Overwatch League and going to a bunch of homestands and meeting a load of fans and this kind of stuff and having like a stream that had, at the time in 2019, I think when I was at home, had like 1,000 viewers or something like that. My mum asked me, have you ever signed a signature for someone? Have you ever signed an autograph for someone before? And that question was so out of left field that I realized my parents have no idea what I do. Like, they just have no concept of what I do at all. Because I signed hundreds of them at the Blizzard Arena, like people that would come up to me, but that sounds like such a weird thing to say, like you're bragging about it. I was just like, yeah, a few. But it's more that my parents have no idea about the size of esports whatsoever. I think they just still think it's a fun hobby that I get paid too much for. Anyway, the next thing I want to address, we're going to add some production value to this, because the next was not so much a question that was submitted to the subscriber Q&A as a full-on attack of my reputation. So here we go. Tweet that says, the conversation on Plat Chat about game stats made me want to check Sideshow's Zen stats. His main. He's in Masters on this role, and he's in the bottom 1% in limbs, damage, and healing, and at the actual anus end of the scale in deaths. I've never seen a more boosted egg. Pure fucking slander. 138 likes, 2 retweets, a bunch of replies of people saying, oh yeah, he's a boosted little fucking egg, isn't he? These stats are nonsense. These stats were from one season where I played half a map, and nobody has these real stats. They're not pretend. They were just default stats. So babybwu replies and said, the more I look at it, the more confused I get. Well, maybe you shouldn't be throwing around slanderous remarks about how boosted some people are, right? Huh? Get your evidence in place first before you make accusations. And then followed up by saying, leak the real lifetime competitive stats, King. Somehow got a hold of them, I assume by just looking at my career profile, and looked at my statistics. I'm not going to zoom in on them for you or anything like that, but Flint's Infernape responded and said, why am I even surprised at these bad numbers? I'm inserting the bad there because that was the implication. The man spends a third of his time flanking, a third respawning, and the other third walking back from spawn. I have to wonder what the 54.5% win rate looked like before the boosting started. So again, just slander and the assumption that my stats are horrific. And then Flint's Infernape said, they decided to look at how I would compare to the Zenyattas in the Overwatch League. And I would rank, according to Flint's Infernape's, the research that they've done, I would rank number 1 in final blows per 10, number 2 in elims per 10, number 4 in hero damage per 10, and, number 22 in healing per 10, which is very similar to where Alarm is on the leaderboards. Really high in damage, really high in elims and in frags, and then somewhere towards the bottom when it comes to healing per 10. I am as good as Alarm, and I've had it with these boosting allegations, so I hope that we completely refuted these far too public Zenyatta callouts. Anyway, to return to the rest of the questions, we have another one here from babybwu that said, to what extent do you care about your appearance? And if you do at all, do you prefer to be seen as handsome or cute? Not labels I would ever apply to myself. In the best of days, neither is the answer to that question. Also, to what extent do you care about your appearance? I mean, look at this. Look at this. The answer is basically zero. I do care about my appearance to some extent. If I'm on a proper broadcast, then I want to look presentable. But that is the bar that I draw. It's a very low bar. Thankfully, the bar is very low generally for men. But I just want to look presentable and professional. I want to look like I haven't been dragged through a hair. I don't want to look like this, basically, if I'm on broadcast. Put a bit of makeup on me to cover up my horrific acne scars and spots. And, I don't know, do something with my hair so that I don't look like I've been dragged through a hedge backwards. While that hedge has been simultaneously dragged backwards through a combine harvester. Anyway, DFV Fan Club says, and this is a serious question right now, that'll take some time to get through. For a long time, South Korea has been considered the premier region for esports. But with the recent South Korean performances in games like League of Legends, in Overwatch, where teams composed of the best South Korea has to offer were defeated by either Chinese or Western teams, and then they give some examples about League of Legends that I'm not going to go into, and then the example of the Overwatch World Cup, where the US won against the full Korean roster, and Shock winning the Overwatch League with a mixed roster. And the conclusion of their question is, do you think this is showing a downwards trend in the dominance of South Korea in esports? Or does this show that other regions are starting to catch up? Or is there not enough to go on yet? I think a downwards trend in the dominance of South Korea doesn't mean that South Korea are getting worse, because you can be less dominant whilst remaining exactly the same if the other regions catch up. So you've kind of presented a false dichotomy there, where it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, right? Like, the rest of the world catching up means naturally that the dominance of South Korea will be reduced, even if they're still an incredibly good region. And I think that's what's happening personally. If we take the Overwatch examples, I'm not going to delve into League of Legends because I don't know enough about the scene. I don't want to embarrass myself. But if we delve into League of Legends specifically, if we delve into Overwatch specifically, the reason that we had the Shock win with the mixed roster and the Chinese teams do so well and the US World Cup team actually win the World Cup was mostly because the infrastructure at the top of the scene has helped these US players get to the position where they are competitive on the world scene. So, for example, these US players had the benefit of working underneath some incredibly good Korean coaches. That is pretty much, in the examples given, Crusty, Jungbuck, 9K. All Korean coaches, though some of them, have like spent time in different regions around the world, and are fluent in a range of other languages. They're not just, you know, a coach that was plucked out of Korea and just given to a mixed team. They have specific skill sets that make them even more useful than usual in those teams. But my point is that it's not just about people being good or the numbers game of how many people in North America play a certain game. It's the seriousness and the infrastructure culture that you have in the countries. For example, the Chinese scene is on a big come up at the moment because the game has gotten more popular, or at least there's been time enough for the players who were originally at the lower level to rise up, and that talent has kind of seeped to the top. But also, as there has been more money in the scene and more attention on the esport, there's been more coaches in there, there's been more opportunities for the players, and they've continued to blossom, and it's now to the point where China is a really big esport. China's kind of its own thing, though, because it often is a numbers game with China, because once a game gets popular in China, it has such an enormous player base that you are naturally going to get, even with lower infrastructure, you're naturally going to get players that rise to the top. But to focus on the West for a moment, and specifically the United States, the infrastructure at the tier 2 level is still pretty lacking in most esports, but also in Overwatch. There aren't that many up-and-coming US players. American Tornado's got a lot, but they're all really, really young. But in terms of like a fresh crop of players, for example, for this season, there's only one as far as I'm aware. I think it's just Dpei that's coming in as a player from North America, not just the United States, but North America as a whole, it's kind of crazy. And we've also lost a lot of the old veteran talent that was playing from the US. People like Raucus and Dogman and Sinatra, for example, that would have previously had those slots on like a World Cup roster. But at the highest level, the intermingling of mixed rosters and the benefit of scrimming against the best Korean players in the world and the benefit of using the best Korean coaches in the world has helped develop that talent. And I think that that's a proof. It's like a case study that shows that if you had the proper culture around getting very good from a tier 2 level in the US, like people really believed in their coaches, and every team hired a coach, and every coach put in a huge amount of effort to get good at coaching and really specialized in that role. And then the players themselves relied on the coaches to get better and really trusted the coaches. If all of this kind of infrastructure was in place, stuff that's been in place in Korea since Brood War in like the early 2000s, if that kind of stuff was in place at the tier 2 level in the US, then the US itself would be able to catch up and continue to develop, especially in the sense that it would pump rookies into the league much more effectively. Because the top level support is there. Once you get into the league, you can work with the best coaches in the world and work against the best players and with the best players with the most experience. But that doesn't really apply at the tier 2 level. And you can't learn from the Korean scene because you're separated geographically from it. And mixed rosters aren't prevalent because of ping, for example. So, I think for different reasons, both China and other Western regions are catching up to Korea. When I look at Valorant, for example, a lot of the Valorant scene is starting to move in a direction where they're taking on coaches and taking on more infrastructure and more of a culture of working to be the best rather than putting together the best players and hoping that the players will be able to make the best cultural decisions to become a good team. And that is new esports thinking, like trialing people really effectively, using data analysis really effectively, relying on a deep coaching staff to be able to help a team, utilizing the other support structure things in place like performance coaches and these kind of things that South Korea has been doing for a long time. So I think these kind of things will help to push the West further in esports than it has been in the past. All right. Now for some more Overwatch-related questions. morphyAU asks, how do you rate Moira players in the league? I can't work out who's good at Moira, who's average, and who's shit. Do all Moiras seem to have the same playstyle, or can they be aggressive and passive like Reinhardt or Lucio players can be? I think Moira is one of those heroes where if you say someone's a good Moira, most people just go like, yeah, but it's fucking Moira, isn't it? And a lot of the time, I would agree, but there are specific examples where you can definitely tell that people are way better on Moira than other people. Some examples I would give are, for if we were to compare like leejaegon or sorry, not leejaegon. What am I talking about? Jonak. I don't know why I said Jaehong. Jonak or Violet's kind of style of Moira to like an Alarm kind of style of Moira, for example. And those guys like Jonak and to somewhat of a lesser extent Violet, when they play Moira, they're putting themselves in positions where they're not extending their efficiency over the course of a team fight. Jonak is the most egregious example of this that I've seen in the league, where he will use damage orbs instead of healing orbs. He will position himself to try and be too far forwards in the fight so that he has to use his fade earlier on in the fight instead of pumping out a lot of heals and only saving his fade for the most dire circumstances. And essentially what you're measuring Moira by is most people are just going to be pumping heals into their team at all times, right? And trying to build up the fastest coalescences. So healing efficiency is like, all right, mate, you're fucking scraping the barrel there if you're trying to use that kind of stuff to rate Moiras. But what I look at in a Moira, and I don't normally pull out like people who are really good at Moira. Normally I'm pulling out people who have a bit of a shaky Moira. And what I'm mostly looking at is efficiency of their ability usage, mostly the fade. Because if your positioning is poor, and by that normally I mean it's a bit too aggressive, or you haven't thought about your exit strategy, or haven't thought about what the rest of your team is positioned like, so you're taking too much damage, then you're going to use your fade too early on in the fight, and that's going to mean that you're much more easily punished. Once a Moira's used fade, they're like anybody else. You can kill them, you can take them out. And once a Moira's dead, in almost every composition you use in Moira, you've lost the team fight because that is all of your healing. It's incredibly rare that you run a Moira with another person that can actually put out a bunch of heals. So that's something that I really focus on. The other thing I focus on as well, though, is that when people use their fade, do they have a plan for where they're fading to? And is it also a position where they can still get value in the team fight? Like some people will just hit the fade button, even at the Overwatch League level, and the rest of their team doesn't respond to it. Like they'll fade out somewhere and get safe, but then their team is just left without heals. And the Moira now is like in a rough position where if they go back to their team, then they don't have, they're not safe. And if they don't go back to their team, then their team is losing out on heals. Whereas when you watch the really good teams play, when their Moira fades, they fade to an area and their team adjusts to receive healing from that area. So that's another thing to try and keep a little eye on, but it doesn't come into play as much. Normally, I'm looking at like their positioning and their fade usage. Okay, Purple asks, do you think seominsoo was lucky that Goats was meta when Runaway got picked up for Owl? I wouldn't play him over Stitch on any DPS hero. This is actually a mad interesting question, in my opinion, even though it's an old question from my Discord. The reason I think it's really interesting is because I do kind of agree with it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see whether seominsoo can adjust this season. Because I was really surprised when the Hangzhou Spark picked him up. I don't really think of seominsoo as having any elite level heroes that he plays, other than maybe the Reaper. there's the whole meme around seominsoo being just flashbang fan the hammer when it comes to McCree. His Zarya was of course excellent, but you're not going to be playing Zarya for the Hangzhou Spark. That's a nonsense way of picking up a player. It's so niche. It's just a waste of money to have him on the bench, having him as a Zarya specialist. Besides which, Zarya plays so differently to how it did during GOATS in the first place. I think he's quite an intelligent player. He just isn't the most mechanically skilled, and I don't really know how he's going to hang at the top level. So I do think to some extent he was lucky when GOATS was meta. But also, I'm willing to be proven completely wrong. I think seominsoo's the kind of player that if he specializes in some role that requires a lot more brain than it does aim, something more like Reaper, where it's just based on your positioning, or Symmetra, or hell, I don't even know what hero it would be. I can't think of them off the top of my head. But if he has a role on the Spark that he really specializes in, I don't know. Maybe he's going to find success and become a player that we really think of as having like a couple of heroes that are very good. At the moment, though, I wouldn't know what they are. If you ask me what are seominsoo's heroes that he's going to play for the Spark, I'd look at you like, I don't know. Reaper? I don't know. Mitch asked, in your opinion, who has been the most consistent, not the best necessarily, but most consistent player throughout all of Overwatch history? And who do you think will remain the most consistent in the future? This is an interesting question. And I think a lot of it comes down to how much you weigh the entirety of Overwatch history. Like, for example, does Prophet even qualify because he's popped onto the scene in, like, mid-2017? So he didn't play during 2016 and early 2017. He didn't play in Apex Season 1 and Apex Season 2, or Apex Season 3, actually. So does he count? I don't know. It depends what you mean by consistency over the whole course of it. I'll answer it in two parts. One that considers the entire history of Overwatch, like all the way back to the very beginning of the game, and one that's just like the most consistent, always gonna get you performances at the top level ever since they've been a pro player. So the first one that jumps to mind if you consider the entirety of Overwatch history is Soon. The guy's been around since the very beginning. He's always been on teams that have been competitive at the beginning on very, very strong top teams. But what strikes me about like Soon being consistent is that he's always reliable. He's not a pop-off player. He was early on in the scene when the skill level wasn't as high, but I don't think he's got worse as the scene has developed. He's remained the same. It's just that the skill level around him has gone up. I think he's maintained an incredibly consistent style over the course of the entirety of the league. He's still really good at heroes like McCree and Reaper that he used to play in the past. He's still always got that pocket pick of the Tracer, which isn't going to blow you away, but he's got like quite an interesting style, the way that he plays it. And recently he's added stuff like the Widowmaker to his pool to be able to play that and have a decent success with it. So I think he's a good shout for the most consistent. You could also say somebody like Surefour, who recently, though he's retired and didn't really get much playtime last season, has since 2016 been a player that's been competing up at the top levels. I think he's somewhat similar to Soon as well in that he hasn't dropped off particularly. The scene has just improved around him. He's been very consistent with the performances you've got out of him ever since he turned up on the scene. I would favor Soon maybe a little more than Surefour, but I think both are incredibly reasonable picks for like most consistent over the entire course of the game. Whereas a lot of main tanks and off tanks they were great at the beginning, but then they dropped off hard and they couldn't keep up. Soon and Surefour have been there the whole time, just keeping up, just there, just ticking away. In terms of like consistently excellent performances every time they're put in the server, I think you would be remiss if you didn't mention Prophet. Even though people talk about playoffs Prophet being another level, most of the time, that was like playoffs bird ring, actually. And Prophet, though he may have had some increase in performance during the playoffs, was the guy during the regular season that was always going to be putting in the work. You go back to any of the games during the regular season, even when the London Spitfire was sucking during like GOATS comp, for example, Prophet was there, putting in his shift, clocking in the 9 till 5, delivering new performances that were trying to win the game for you. He wasn't one of those guys that's going to be inconsistent during the season, but when it comes to playoffs and the rest of the team levels up, well, now Prophet looks like a monster. So I don't really buy that Prophet's like a player that is only there for the big games, which is kind of a bit of the implication when people talk so much about playoffs Prophet. Playoffs Prophet does appear to be a thing. He steps up in the big games, but he's always there in the regular games as well. It's more gesture and previously Birdring. And who else that they've played with as well? Fitz actually is the more inconsistent of the two recently. So, yeah, I think you'd be very remiss if you didn't talk about Prophet. It's hard to really talk about a main tank that's been consistent throughout all of their Overwatch history. You would have maybe said Mano, but I think Mano has had some significant weaknesses in his gameplay over the course of the last year or year and a half that kind of exclude him from this list. And I'm very interested to see whether Mano regains this top main tank title next year playing for the Philadelphia Fusion. That's one of the major storylines of the APAC region to me, is what does Mano do with Philly? This classically reserved and reactive main tank is now on what has previously been the most aggressive and explosive roster that we've had since the formation of the Overwatch League. How do the two styles mesh? Who gives in that scenario? Presumably Mano. And can he keep up the top level performances that he's been able to achieve from 2017 up until you could say mid to late 2019? I'm sure there are other examples as well, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Okay, Purple asked, you said on stream... Oh, by the way, this question was ages ago, but I wanted to bring it up now again. Purple said, you said on stream after fdgod popped off, bear in mind this is probably in like April 2020, that you think he could be the best Lucio in the world. Was that just in the hype of the moment, or do you really think he's better than Slime, IDK, leejaegon, Tobi? Okay, I sometimes slip up on broadcast, actually. There's a lot of other... Actually, there aren't a lot of other. There's like 2 other people that work in esports who have the motto that you should always be incredibly precise with your language so that you're making sure that the fans know who is the best at any period in time. I try to do that, but I don't always fulfill that. I try and only give like 5 people in my top 5. I literally rank them out before I do broadcasts, so that if I'm talking about like, I don't know, Rhea, for example, I don't throw in the term, he's a top 5 off-tank, if I don't truly believe he's a top 5 off-tank. Now, I've slipped up with that a few times. Like, for example, this fdgod comment, I can't remember exactly what I said about fdgod. It is possible that fdgod was the best Lucio in the world at that period in time, but I think it's definitely open to debate even now, and it would have been at that period of time as well. But I remember specifically I tweeted, or maybe said, no, I actually said live on the broadcast that Smurf and Striker were the best Winston and Tracer in the world at a period in time somewhere late in the 2020 season. And when I thought about it further, I actually believed that it was Fearless and Striker who were the best Winston and Tracer respectively, but Smurf was like second by a tiny little margin. So in the hype of the moment, I thought it was reasonable to say that. So sometimes I definitely do like slip up in that sense, but to address fdgod, I'm extremely excited for what fdgod's going to do next season. He's playing with the best coaching staff, or at least one of the best coaching staff. The kind of original core of Shock has gone their own way, but this coaching staff still is very, very good. He's playing with an incredibly good coaching staff. He is mechanically... I think he is mechanically the best Lucio in the world. I know that you could make a great argument for leejaegon, but I personally do think that fdgod edges it slightly. I wouldn't be mad in any sense if people said it was leejaegon. In fact, if you catch me on another day, I might say it is leejaegon. But I think it's those two, right? You've also got people like Funny Astro who are absolutely up there with and among the best. But I think I would put Funny Astro at probably third. In terms of the overall best Lucio in the world, I think fdgod is a guy that has massive impact whenever he plays it, but seems to only have that one kind of track where he plays and tries to make the plays, and he's very much a playmaker. He doesn't seem to get caught out as much as leejaegon does in that sense, but we've definitely seen in like the highest level matches that the Overwatch League has, where the San Francisco Shock were Discord orbing and punishing leejaegon for going for those plays as part of their strategy in the playoffs. I wonder whether fdgod will run into that trap and how he will adjust when he plays with and against the best, the absolute best in the world. Because most of the time when Paris were the best in the world, I don't think fdgod was actually playing Lucio. It was more to do with Sparkle. But either way, I'm incredibly interested in following fdgod's career because I think he has the raw potential to be the best Lucio in the world if he isn't at the moment. All right, styxerating asks, if Chengdu had a rigid, structured, and meta-focused coach in the vein of a Dpei or a Crusty, do you think they could be molded into a good team? I personally think they have the talent to do so, but I don't know if they've been sucked too far into the void of silliness that they themselves created to change their ways. Now, bear in mind that this question was asked midway through the 2020 season, where it did seem like Chengdu was still just running silly bugger strats. So this question made a lot of sense at the time, and to some extent it still does as well. Chengdu have had the most success when they play into their own style, and they play compositions that are difficult for opponents to adapt to. Now, I won't even bother trying to answer the question of whether or not that's a good thing. The question here says, could they be a good meta team? I think the original Chengdu core that was present in 2019 and 2020, Chengdu wasn't an original team, were they? Wait, maybe they were. Am I losing my mind? I don't think they were. God, I'm actually losing my mind. I'm gonna have to look that up. How can I not remember if Chengdu was part of the original 12 teams? My brain is just dying. Okay, Overwatch League. Season 1, regular season. Who's in this gosh darn league? No, there was no Chengdu. God, I'm losing my mind. Okay, yeah, that's why the Shanghai Dragons were so special as well, because they were only the only full Chinese roster that started out. Anyway, okay, actually losing my brain. So the core of the team that played in 2019 and 2020, basically, Eamon is the only viable main tank because the previous main tanks they had, like Jashirin and Ating, just they weren't good enough, basically. They weren't good enough to be able to play. There were two usable main tanks that came out of China, or rather were Chinese and spoke Mandarin, and they were Gushui, who was just miles above everybody else, and then Eamon, who specialized in the ball but could also play Orisa to a pretty decent level. And then had some moments where it looked good on the Reinhardt too. And basically never played Winston. Do I think they could have been a good meta team with that roster? No. Honestly, no. I think they would have been held back too much by Eamon and by the lack of comfort playing in any kind of Winston meta. It would have been rough for them. They liked playing around like Jinmu as well, where he was crazy aggressive, and their players were all very scrappy and individualistic. They never really had the same level of team coordination as other teams. We saw them try and play meta stuff at various times throughout the season. They had like an all-right double shield comp that they ran at some point during 2020, but it kind of fell to pieces later on. And the question asks if they had a better meta-focused coach. But to be honest, I don't think you can say the coach was the problem there. I think the players are the problem in that sense. Now, for next year, though, Chengdu are looking spicy, and I think they could be a meta team. Now, do I want them to be a meta team? I don't know. Maybe not. With Gaga being so incredibly good at ball, arguably better than Eamon, depending on how good Eamon is, or how much Eamon has improved since last season, because I think current Gaga is better than 2020 Eamon. So unless Eamon's improved, Gaga might be the better pick when it comes to ball. With how good Gaga is on that pick, but also how versatile he is, he can actually play all of the other tanks to at least a reasonable level. They could play meta, or they could try and focus on making Gaga's ball really work in a classic Chengdu style. The fact that they've got their old coach back, the one that was so good at coming up with these funky strategies, makes me think that they're more likely to stick to that previous Chengdu identity that they've had in the past. And the addition of Gaga is just going to open up different doors for them, where now they can play meta stuff, probably to a higher level if they want to. That's what I'm hoping for from Chengdu, is that they still retain a little bit of, not the silliness, but the creativity. And if they need to play the meta, they can and they should have the level of talent on that roster to be able to handle it. All right, let's answer some Overwatch League kind of format questions and stuff like that. Shrew says, do you think it's likely that a non-English speaking player could ever win an award like the Dennis Hawelka? Given the Overwatch League's largely American staff, could anything realistically be done about the discrepancy? So the context for this is the Dennis Hawelka Award gets voted on by, I can't even remember who votes on it though. I think it's like the talent, I think coaches might get a vote as well, some journalists and stuff like that. I don't think the Dennis Hawelka is a fan vote, but essentially what they're saying is because there's a massive majority of those people are actually Western, they do ask a lot of, like, they ask the Korean and the Chinese talent as well. At least they did do in previous years. I assume it's the same. I don't know whether they ask journalists from other foreign media sites, though I assume they would if they were covering the Overwatch League. But even so, it is biased towards, or at least weighted towards, it being at least an English-speaking player, if not like a Western player. I do think, though, that it is likely that a non-English speaking player would win an award like the Dennis Hawelka Award. I think, for example, Gamsu was very close to winning it in the previous year. And I think what stole it away a lot of the time is that the Western, or rather the English-speaking organizations seem to put a little more effort into doing work within the community, like charity work and stuff like that. Maybe, again, this again might be my English-speaking bias, but I have not even seen, like, posts on Reddit that have been translated, or, like, I follow all the translators on Twitter and I haven't seen this kind of stuff be translated, of like Gamsu heading up a charity drive for LGBT in Korea or anything like that, you know? Like, those kind of things only seem to happen on the Western organization side of things. I don't know whether that's because of just a different cultural expectation from the Western organizations compared to the Chinese and Korean. But that seems to be the difference maker. At least it was last year, because that's the main reason that Costa ended up winning the award, was not just because he's a positive player that's good on camera and a constant rock for the team. Gamsu has all of that as well, but it was specifically the charity work with the St. Jude organization, I believe, that pushed it beyond the edge for most people voting. So if that did happen within the Korean scene or within the Chinese scene, and it seeped through to the Western base, then I could definitely see a non-English speaking player winning the award. I also don't think that nothing like that even needs to happen. It just needs to not happen for a candidate on the Western side, like the English-speaking side. Like, for example, if Costa hadn't done the charity work, I think Gamsu would have won the award, because he was such a positive force in the community. Like, what was he doing? Taking people out that were shit-talking him in ranked on, like, walks with his dog and stuff? That's wholesome as fuck. The guy was just a boss. But like I said, I think if Costa had not been doing the charity work, Gamsu would have won the award, because enough filters through via translators and stuff like that. You ask, can anything realistically be done about the discrepancy? Yes, I think something can be done about the discrepancy, and it's about organizations trying to maximize their reach into other fan bases. for example, specifically, organizations investing in translators, investing in people to do English-speaking content for the Korean and Chinese players, and in some senses, vice versa. Like for the for New York and Philadelphia, for example, who have just moved over to the APAC region. New York were there last year, but whatever. Maybe creating Korean or Chinese content because you're playing at Korean or Chinese hours would be a hugely beneficial thing for those organizations next year. But it's not really done that much because it's an incredible amount of effort to translate and subtitle the videos and come up with content that's good for a range of different cultures and like double up on your content in that way. But that is the thing that could be done about the discrepancy, and it would be a great boon to the scene as well. I would fucking love more English subtitled content from the Korean players. I feel like there's still so many players in the scene who are Korean that I don't know their personality, genuinely. Like, I don't know what their personality is like. Even when I was interacting with them, saying hello to them in the corridors and stuff in the Blizzard Arena back in 2018, because of that language barrier, I mean, for anybody that hasn't interacted with many people who don't speak their own language, think about if you ever go traveling. When I go traveling, I can only speak a very basic amount of another language, like barely enough to get by. And so even if I'm in like France, where I know the most French out of any language, which is not even slightly conversational, I would come across as extremely timid because all I'm saying is like, oh, thank you. Oh, sorry, that kind of stuff. Like, I can't express my personality in any sense in another language. And that, I think, is a big barrier to learning more about these other players, especially when such a large proportion of the player base is Korean. Now, Overwatch generally as well does also seem to attract reclusive individuals that aren't really interested in streaming, don't have large personalities, etc., etc. I'm talking about even the English-speaking people. Like, people like Super are the massive outliers in this case. Avast actually has a theory that it's just the people that came from TF2 that have the massive fan bases within the scene, like Avast, like Super, like Sideshow, like Bren, like the people that are, I don't know, for some reason, the people that have become large personalities within the scene started out in TF2. Maybe it's just like the amount of time that you spend in esports, you realize that a brand is really important and you can't just get by grinding the game all the time. But for some reason, the Overwatch League also has, when you compare it, like, for example, when I'm comparing it right now to Valorant, working within the Valorant scene, everyone and their nans has got opinions in the Valorant scene. Everyone's talking about it. And I'm not talking about just the English-speaking players as well. I'm talking about, like, the CIS players that don't speak English too well. There's like translated interviews of them like talking all sorts of like really interesting opinions about like how to shot call in the game, how the strategy works, their opinions on the different teams and stuff. I'm talking about the Korean teams as well. I'm talking about like the mostly the Brazilian teams as well. Holy shit, the Brazilian teams have got, and the Brazilian scene has got personality. But for some reason, Overwatch missed the train on that, and I don't know why. Let's move on to the next one, though. Mitch said, if you were to add an award to OWL, what would it be? Or what award would you subtract? Now, I think this was midway through the 2020 season again, or maybe it was like just coming up to the awards system. And all I'm going to do to answer this question is basically point you towards the awards show that we did for Plat Chat in 2020, because we came up with a bunch of our own awards as well, like most underrated, top 3 in each role, what else did we do? Coach of the Year, which I think is a hugely important one that the Overwatch League misses out on. And like funniest moment of the year. Like, there's so many cool awards that you could make that would add value to the community. But for whatever reason, the Overwatch League has actually been quite conservative with the amount of awards that it has. Papi Pie-on-ass, which don't know why he's got that name in my Discord, says, with the whole Titans situation, which, I mean, that tells you how long ago this was, do you feel the presence of a player union could have prevented the entire thing? I wonder why I'm reading this question right now. With a union requiring things like adequate housing, translators for mixed rosters, and so on, could this have been avoided? Right. Many parts to this. Let's start by addressing the problems with forming a player union. No one can really form a player union for the players. Riot has tried it within League of Legends. They like formed the player union, but Riot ran the player union, and then there's supposed to be like some handoff to the players to run it as well, which seems like the best way of doing it, to be honest, because players are almost never going to be organized enough to do that kind of thing themselves. The Overwatch scene, actually, for any people who are new to it, had 2 different attempts to form a players union before the Overwatch League was even a thing. I believe that, I think a player called Morte, who I think was from the Netherlands and originally played for E-United, he was trying to start one with a lawyer way back in the day, and someone else as well, but I can't remember who the second person was that was trying to form a players union. But they require a huge amount of money to get started because of all the legal fees. The legal process is incredibly complex because you've got players from all over the world. They're not competing in one central location either. They're competing online, and they're living in different areas too. So you have to deal with different state laws within the US, different country laws. It's just a pain in the dick. And in some cases, is actually not even legal. As far as I'm aware, from the Counter-Strike scene, the CSPPA, which is their version of a players' association, like a players' union, that was formed by the players, and it has players on the board, they've had so many problems with that. For starters, apparently it's not even like legally a players' union, it's a player agency or an association or something, because they weren't able to form a union legally for, again, reasons that I'm not qualified to talk about, that you would have to talk to a lawyer about. But that led to so many other issues. Like the CSPPA has to get funded by like making agreements with tournament organizers to get paid to allow their players to play in them. So it essentially leads to situations where the CSPPA can like blackmail tournament organizers to pay them ridiculous amounts of money. Otherwise, their players will just refuse to play in the tournament. It's like a shakedown operation. And the things that the CSPPA are fighting for end up being wildly irrelevant a lot of the time. Like the recent thing that blew up within the CS scene was that the CSPPA were really strict about using player communications incorrectly, which is a really fair thing to be bothered about. But they went on like strike for that, whilst having horrible communication with the tournament organizer and not even telling them that strike was even going to be on the table. So they refused to even like communicate. And by the way, the tournament organizer thought that they had resolved the issue before the strike even happened. And then they went on strike for that instead of going on strike for like teams imploding within North America and people being banned from play unfairly, and these other like major issues within the scene. They focused on this tiny little issue. There's also a bunch of different problems with the CSPPA in terms of them just being an old boys club that only protects the top end of the scene. Because there's no clear boundary on what is or isn't a professional CS player. Like, at what point do you become a pro CS player? When you're getting paid at all? When you're represented by your own organization, even if they're just paying you in like skins or travel to LAN or something like that? Is it when you're participating in a certain league? Like, are you cut? If you're in between organizations, so you're not getting paid, do you stop being a pro player, even if you're competing at the highest level? It's so difficult. Those kind of solutions would be a little easier within the Overwatch League because it would just be Overwatch League players that were covered by it. But it wouldn't really extend down to the tier 2 level. It wouldn't help any of those people out, which arguably are the people that need the help the most. Okay, so a players union has a lot of issues with actually forming it and running it in a way that works. So what is the solution? What is the solution to the Titan situation and the Valiant situation? Well, in my opinion, the solution is agents. Player agents that genuinely care about the welfare of their clientele. There have been a bunch of cases in Overwatch where very, very large agencies that represent huge amounts of the Overwatch player base didn't have time for their players. And I've talked to players who were like, my agents don't really seem to care about me. But then there's other agencies, smaller agencies usually, that do a great job of protecting their players from these kind of situations. So the question specifically asked, a union would require things like adequate housing, translators for mixed rosters, etc., etc. The way that Overwatch League contracts are formed is that there's a generic kind of boilerplate contract that everybody gets, and then your agent can negotiate you extra terms that either mitigate some of the terms that are in the boilerplate contract. Like, I don't know, for example, they might say, no, I don't even want to give a specific example because I don't know exactly what's in the contract. So I'm not going to give a specific example. I'm going to keep it vague. But clauses that can counteract things that exist in the boilerplate template or add on to things like must provide X size housing, like must have an apartment that's on their own instead of sharing a housing with somebody else, things like that. Or if it's a visa situation, for example, like the recent Valorant stuff, the boilerplate might say something like, if they can't get a visa, then we can drop them for reasonable cause, which is a very fair thing that happens in a lot of esports contracts, because if something gets fucked up with a visa, or if the player causes a problem with the visa, then you don't want to be on the hook to pay them for an entire season because they fucked up the process, or they have, I don't know, a prior... they've been arrested before or something, so they can't come to the US. I don't know what it would be, but it is reasonable to have that in the contract, that if there's a problem with the visa that the organization can't solve, or just generally, if there is a problem with the visa, we can drop them for due cause. And an agent might negotiate, well, as long as that is good faith effort was put in from the organization side to secure a visa, and that way people can't just go, oh, well, we couldn't get a visa, whatever, you dropped. They have to actually prove that they tried to apply for a visa and it was denied. These are the kind of things that agents will actively fight for, that is more than just the dollar and cent amount of your salary. Things that protect players. And that's the value, even more so than just negotiating higher salaries. That's the value really of having good agents within an esports scene, is that they can take a look at a contract, add things or remove things to protect players more, and mitigate the need for player unions, because each individual player is protected. And, for example, if they're all represented by one agency, an organization, they know when like a large amount of players are getting dicked over, and they can fight against it more effectively. Okay, moving on to the next question. Fire Element says, how often do the casters get to talk to players or coaches during the COVID era to get a read on the meta? The answer to that is not very often, but also it would be as much as we were willing to reach out to them and ask. The reason I don't do it very often to get a read on the meta, I tend to ask people to get a read when the meta has changed massively. Like coming into playoffs, for example, where you're hitting the ground running, there's elimination games, and you don't have time to like learn the meta on the fly as a caster. In those circumstances, I will often reach out to a player or a coach that I have a pre-existing relationship and try and ask them roughly what the meta is. The problem is, in the COVID era, we also had hero pools and frequent balance patches that made the meta, I mean, no one knew what it was. Let me just put it like that. I would talk to coaches and they would say, oh, well, we're mostly playing this, but we've seen a lot of this, and some people are playing this. And then I would watch APAC and it'd be totally different. And I don't mean totally different in the sense of like, they're playing a different game entirely, but people would say that dive was a thing, and then we'd be seeing mostly double shield, or people would be saying that Sombra was being played everywhere, and we saw very little Sombra apart from a couple of teams playing it. So actually talking to the players and coaches doesn't always lead to a better understanding of what the meta is, because people play different stuff in scrims compared to the matches, and that is part of the reason why you get teams like the Houston Outlaws who thought they were really good in scrims and then turned up their matches and they got destroyed, because teams have thought about the fact that they were getting destroyed in the scrims and decided to play something different when it comes to the actual match itself. So yeah, I tend to I tend to prioritize match data. Match data is the holy grail. It will tell you what you need to know. And most of the time, metas are pretty easy to get a handle on, like what the win conditions are, because we've seen 3-4 years of Overwatch at this point, and most of the archetypes of compositions have been figured out. Okay, Snowpointe had a really long question here, and it's very related to the question that we started this topic with. They say, my personal perception of OWL content is that the lack of on-broadcast player-related content is not only harmful for the league in general and its longevity, but it puts the Chinese and Korean players, even just non-English speaking players in general, at a disadvantage when it comes to community awards and recognition that are awarded by Western talent, and even fan perception, such as the Hawelka Award. I'm not contesting the recipients, more so wondering what unconscious biases remain unchecked with this disconnect. For example, a fair few people had individuals like Gamsu and Sebiobi expected as the Season 2 Hawelka recipient and were surprised to hear it was Custer, which makes sense. He had established broadcast presence as Valiant's leader, is a good guy, upstanding member of the community, and had charity streams that were well publicized among Western viewership. But would he have received the award had his charisma and leadership been broadcast exclusively in Korean or on Korean broadcasts? Had his charity streams been in Korean only, etc.? I can't help but wonder. I could extend on this, how I think it's emblematic of OWL's content problem, even understanding that often players are so camera-averse that they would forgo developing their personal brand, etc. But for now, I'll just ask your general thoughts on these things. I think I covered a lot of this in the previous topic, but I want to go deeper a little bit on some of these. So, we've also been doing remote broadcasts during COVID, and the opportunities for player content during COVID is very minimal. The league isn't at homestands with these players, and so the league can't produce regular content with players. The league has a limited mandate to force players to make content for it, right? Like, it would be a bad thing if the league was forcing players to make content that the players didn't want to make repeatedly, week after week after week. It would be great for the fans to see these players, but if the players don't want to engage with it, then it would be bad to force them. They're already in a stressful scenario, playing, etc. So they don't work directly for the league. They work for their own team, their own franchise, their own organization. So I don't personally believe that it's the league's responsibility, even though they could probably like twist the arm of the players and force them into doing things. I think, for example, the broadcast that we had where the YouTube content that we recently put out on the Overwatch League channel that was like VOD reviews with Dogman and Logix, the ones that I did there, those were good, but also the players wanted to do them. And I'm assuming that the league asked a lot of different players. Do I think, though, that the league should have someone like Danny, for example, Danny Lim, who could do the same content that I did with Dogman and Logix, but with Korean players, and then have a translator on board that could translate all of that to English, or maybe even dub it? I don't know. Yes, I think that that would be a huge addition to the content that the Overwatch League produces. I don't know whether those things are or are not planned for 2021. If I was in charge of the content, that's what I would be doing, especially because you have way more Korean players and Chinese players to be able to pick from than you theoretically do English-speaking only players. So if you wanted to bang out a ton of Korean content, you could probably find Korean players that were down to do it, especially if you had someone like Danny who's already developed relationships with the scene. So I think that something like that would be a large bonus for the Overwatch League. But if we ignore the Overwatch League's responsibilities for a little bit and we really focus on the organizations themselves, that's where I think the majority of this has to come from, genuinely, is the way that this system would function the best, in my opinion, is that you would get on-broadcast player-related content that Overwatch League could use that the teams made. And Overwatch League, as far as I'm aware, is allowed to use that content because it's their partner teams, their franchise teams, YouTube channels, and presumably they've signed some kind of rights to share content. So what I would like to see is, like New York, for example, not just doing highlight clips of their players, but actually doing, on-camera fun stuff. And I think if that gets subtitled and turned into English, that should be featured on the broadcast. That should be maybe even put up on the Overwatch League YouTube channel as well, a couple of days after the New York YouTube channel, so that the New York YouTube channel continues to grow and you can premiere it there. But it also goes on the Overwatch League YouTube channel for the larger viewer base that's actually there to watch the game itself. And I think that is something that would really be valuable for the teams and the league as a whole. Now, why does that not happen? First of all, it's COVID, everyone's remote, and that makes content much more difficult to actually do. You can do stream highlights and stuff like that that could be really popular, but actually getting people in a room, they tend to be way more comfortable and way more open. If you're doing interviews with them, they're less distracted. If you're playing games or something with like funny, weird games with teammates, they tend to show a lot more of themselves. What are some other reasons that it doesn't happen? Because the YouTube audience for that kind of stuff sucks, honestly. Like, the YouTube audience for that kind of content in the Overwatch League is really, really poor. People have tried to make it before. Some people have tried to make stuff like that before. Like, the LA Valiant was doing some stuff with their team, but none of it really bangs on YouTube. You compare that to, like, Valorant right now, and that shit pounds on YouTube. If you have if you have like Cloud9 make some videos where it's like 10's guesses what rank you're at, that shit poof hits the algorithm, pops the fuck off. I haven't looked into the specifics, but I think, for example, if you took one of the largest players, if you took like Dpei or something, and you posted Dpei or Super guesses what SR you are, it would do pretty well, but it wouldn't be getting hundreds of thousands of views like the Valorant videos are. So for whatever reason, the audience isn't really there on YouTube for Overwatch in the same way that it is for some other games. So it doesn't end up being enticing monetarily. It doesn't seem like you're getting the value out of it. I do think, though, that the long-term benefits would be pretty huge, especially for the league itself. Right, let's move on to some work questions, work-related, some personal career questions. And I hope you guys are happy you're getting your money's worth here. Xathon says, are you trying to make your interviews official OWL content, or do you want them to be your own personal thing? Right, if you can recall back, this was when my interviews were happening during the homestands of the Overwatch League. If I was doing them right now, if I had been continuing to do them throughout the season, I haven't set it up at the moment yet, but I've got a Sony A6000. I've got like a really nice microphone setup. We've invested in a bunch of plat chat stuff as well. If there was homestands going on, this would have all been based in LA, where some of the players were too. And I would have loved to turn my interviews into a really big, well-produced series. The thing is, though, I'm not going to give them to OWL for free. That's crazy. They're my content, right? So I would never aspire for them to become official OWL content unless OWL was willing to pay for them. Would OWL have been willing to pay for them? I don't know, maybe. I think that it would have been a good thing for them to potentially do that if they had continued to be produced and been done well, but we're in a COVID environment. The other aspect of this as well, the reason that I chose it too, is that I fucking love doing interviews. I love doing it. I think I have a talent for it. I like drawing answers out of players. I think short term, long term, I love doing that kind of stuff. I also like doing kind of podcast hosting and desk hosting kind of work as well. So this is the kind of stuff that, all right, maybe not for the Overwatch League, because they seem to have, you know, their own people that want to do interviews, and the Overwatch League actually only does very, very short interviews during the live broadcast. They don't really give very much time for in-depth answers whatsoever. It's very surface level. But if the opportunity ever presented itself, I'd love to do interviews. I would happily take a job as an interviewer for a live broadcast. If anyone's out there and they're interested, any game as well. I will learn any game. I'm down to do interviews if I like the game. It is a personal passion of mine, and I'm very happy to do it. I'm not just a caster and an analyst. Okay, Bing Bong asks, how do you find the appropriate balance between hyping a moment up and providing useful analysis while casting? It's a tough balance. I think a few things go through my head during a moment. Was the play cool enough strategically that the analysis will add to the entertainment factor, or should I just stick to hyping it? For example, if someone lands a sick pulse bomb, I'm not going to go off on how their pulse bomb percentage is the highest in the world or something. Or at least I'm not likely to. If I had that stat with me, I think that might be some cool filler. But most of the time, I'm just going to talk about how good the player is and like continue to talk about how good he is as a method of hyping him up. I'm not going to talk about like how well they set up the pulse bomb grab or something like that. But if I notice a specific set play that's really cool and it works very well, well, then I'm thinking in my head, if I'm a viewer, I want to know that that was well thought out. Like that would increase my enjoyment of the broadcast. So at that point, I'm thinking about useful analysis. There are people that have very different opinions on this. To use examples from the Overwatch League, Wolf is a lot of analysis and narrative while casting. A lot of that kind of stuff. If someone makes a cool play, Wolf is going to be there to give you, to like tie that cool play into an overarching narrative of why that play is good, what they've done before in the past, whether or not it's important that they stepped up in that moment to the overall flow of the game, that kind of stuff. On the other end of the spectrum, we have Mr. X, who is like, that was cool. And he's kind of saying what the people are thinking, right? He's generally speaking not tying it into narratives as much, but he makes you feel excited about it because he's saying it was exciting. He's talking about how cool it was. He's talking about how good the player is. And finding the balance between that is a bit of personal style as well, of like where you want to drop down between the two types. Generally speaking, I think you have to base it on the pace of the game as well. Like if you don't have very much time, you should probably just go with the hype. If you have a lot of time or it's really important for the narrative, maybe go for the narrative. It's something you constantly have to be adjusting, I think, depending on the importance of it, the importance of the match, and the entertainment factor of both. Priest asks, do you and Bren get feedback on your cast from Blizzard, Overwatch League, or others? Is it a regular thing or more of an off-the-cuff, hey, that tangent you went on in the Dallas game was a bit long and weird, don't do that again, sort of thing? The Overwatch League did at one point during 2018 pay, I think, actually quite a lot of money for someone with a huge amount of broadcast experience working in TV, like TV sports, to come in and do casting reviews and desk reviews with us. And I found that extremely useful. They tried it then later on with other people who were less qualified, and it was bad. So I think esports is at a scene esports is at a place in the scene where most of the people who could give great talent feedback are either current talent who are still doing it or have moved on to doing other producer roles, and most companies aren't really thinking about talent development as a thing. For example, in the Valorant scene right now, a tournament organizer, Nerd Street Gamers, who work with the Philadelphia Fusion, actually, their parent company Comcast, I think, owns them, or at least owns a part of them. They turned like a recent tournament into a caster challenge where we won't pay you anything, but if you do well, you'll get to work the main event, and then we will pay you. And it's just like an exploitative way of getting free work from developing casters, where you're offering them no feedback. You're just kind of trying to use natural selection to get enough casters to the point where one of them is good. It's not effective. It's also part of the reason, by the way, if I can go on a little tangent here, why you see so little diversity in broadcast talent. Froskurin, I think, tweeted recently saying about the LEC broadcast that it looked incredibly white. There were I think there are. I should say, I'm not an expert on the League of Legends scene. Though I think there were a bunch of women involved in the broadcast talent for the LEC. I know that the main host, Shocks, is like a mainstay within there, and I think there's other people that joined the analyst desk as well. And obviously there's a range of backgrounds in terms of what country they're from and stuff like that. But part of the reason that we have such limited diversity in broadcast talent is that there's no help to come up. So it's purely a numbers game. And if you're willing to like grind it out and get lucky, and you're in the financial situation to be able to commit to it as a career, which disproportionately skews it towards white men from the UK and the US, and sometimes from Australia, but even that quite rarely, because they're fluent at the language. They don't really have issues with being having their accent be mistaken on broadcast. Most of them come from more privileged positions in terms of their finances, and they are part of the largest demographic that consumes and plays video game content. But if you have an active talent development scene, then you can actually push other people from more diverse backgrounds who have different styles and different ways of talking that are going to break the very strict mold of the white male broadcaster. You're going to push different backgrounds into the broadcast, but you're not going to give it to people who don't deserve it, because your talent development system is going to create new people that do deserve it, that are from those different backgrounds. So that to me is like a massively missing component in basically every major company in esports right now. And it's something that I love doing. I've done some on my stream on my personal stream, where I do Valorant VOD reviews for the casters. I've done some Overwatch VOD reviews as well. And I just enjoy talking about broadcasting and talking about what I think they could have done better, what they need to work on, this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's we get very little feedback from Blizzard, the Overwatch League, and others. Peer review is something that most people are very averse to within the talent industry as well, because they view it as being like nitpicky or trying to say that you're better than someone else. Like, I personally very, very rarely give advice to my peers that work in the Overwatch League, even though I think there's some things that people do very well, and I think there's some things that people do pretty poorly, like in any job. But I never give them that advice because it's unsolicited, and that culture hasn't been developed. It was certainly developed at some point because we had people like Monty and Doa working on the broadcast who had a lot more experience. But generally speaking, I don't have more experience than anybody that's working on the broadcast currently, other than, I guess I could say Jaws, but Jaws has been doing broadcasting for as long as I have. He just hasn't been doing it in the Overwatch League for as long. But yeah, people get touchy about peer review. So there needs to be like systems in place to actually give proper feedback, and talent will not only get better, but you'll see a different range of talent develop. And personally, I think that the Overwatch League has gotten through it so far. A lot of the Overwatch League, because they prioritized spending big on talent in 2018 and got some big names like Parquet, Monty, Doa, Semler, these kind of people involved, Matt to some extent as well, and Mitch. They started with a core base of really good talent. Scenes like the Valorant scene are in shambles right now. The talent skill is all over the place. Like, there's some people who are wildly inexperienced and pretty poor doing extremely large tournaments. There's some people who are excellent but aren't doing many tournaments because they're getting priced out by the less experienced talent. It's like, it's a total mess. And the general answer, the way that the scene normally goes, is that eventually, over time, people figure out they would prefer to watch the better casters because it's a better product. And therefore, the tournament organizers eventually pay more for the better casters because they want to please the viewers and get more viewers. And then eventually, there's like, you know, the worse casters get locked out to some extent, and they have to get better, or new casters come up who are better to be able to fill in the new spots once they actually come up. But that isn't a good system. That's a shit system. You should be actively developing your scene. And I would love to do that within the Valorant scene as well. But I also need someone to pay me for it, so. But maybe I'll try and do something on my own where I do like paid VOD reviews to try and actively work in that area. Anyway, let's move on. It's something I'm very passionate about that doesn't get talked about very much in the industry, but it's definitely something that's extremely underdeveloped in the industry. Silmarion says, is doing the advertisements during the broadcast, so the voiceovers in the ads, part of your contract terms in your regular pay, or are they negotiated additionally? I'm very curious about how business works in your area. The genuine answer to this is it depends on what your contract looks like. It really does. Some people will have much more limited contracts, either because they had more leverage when they came to the negotiation table, or because they are signed in a more limited capacity or something like that. And some people will be signed on very extensive full-term contracts, which include a shit ton of things that they're contracted for, like YouTube videos and like written articles and voiceovers and all sorts of different things, and like consulting on the side and producing segments and all sorts of other things. So the genuine answer is just that it depends on what your contract looks like. Now, I would say, though, generally speaking, when it comes to people who work full-time in shows like Overwatch League or League of Legends, like for the LEC or LCS, I would say it's industry standard that those kind of things are part of regular pay, unless it's specific branded content. Like it's different content that is being sponsored by an outside sponsor. Like, I don't know, if Snickers comes to some tournament organizer and says, hey, we want to produce a Snickers YouTube series where we break down the top 5 best plays. Usually industry standard would be that is separate pay, whereas any regular voiceovers would just be part of your generic contract that you are signed as a broadcaster to do. Okay, Formation asks, how exhausting is making content and needing to put on a performance for the sake of a public record image of yourself that must fit within the existing brand that has become attached to you? Particularly given that you have multiple avenues of content creation at present, which effectively fills the entire week without many days off from the content creation grind. Well, actually, I have been taking a break recently, and Formation at the moment might not even see the answer to this question because this was before he went into the military. I hope he's enjoying himself. But let's try and tackle this kind of piece by piece. I have been taking a lot of time off recently. I haven't been on the content grind the entire time. But if I look ahead to the Overwatch season itself, I'm going to be trying to watch Overwatch live and probably doing companion streams with Overwatch as it's happening live if I'm not doing actual broadcast for it. And then I'm going to be watching the VODs of any Valorant tournaments that happened over that exact same weekend, all before I get to sit down on Monday to record Plat Chat that broadcasts on Tuesday, and that's for Overwatch and Valorant. And then when it comes around to like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and actually I don't know whether Overwatch is going to be broadcasting on Friday, but okay, let's assume that I have Friday off as well. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm probably going to be streaming at least 1 or 2 of those days per week as well. So you only end up having like 2 days off, and those days off are probably filled with watching more Valorant, to be honest, because there's no way you're going to fit it in on the Saturday and Sunday after watching Overwatch League. There's physically not enough time in the day. So the entire week does end up very full. But the question itself is how exhausting is making that content and the need to fit within an existing brand image that's been attached to you. I don't really think about a brand image very much. It's something actually that they talked to me about at the beginning of 2019 in Overwatch League. Was they wanted to nail down what my brand was, like whether I'm the funny guy or whether I'm the analytical guy. And I kind of shrugged it off at that point because I was like, I'm just going to do both. Like, I don't care that my brand doesn't have a specific identity. I don't care that, like, for example, I'll give you a little tangent here. The YouTube algorithm fucking hates my YouTube channel. It actually does not know what to do with it at all. Wyatt works on my YouTube channel, and he has been given the hardest task in the history of humanity. Because even though I've got like 40k subs and something like that, I get horrible viewership on all of my YouTube videos because the people that subscribe to my YouTube channel, people who are watching this video, for example, have no idea what content to expect on a daily basis. Are they getting Overwatch analysis that's hardcore? Are they getting some random stream highlights? Are they getting companion streams, which are kind of funny but kind of analytical as well? Are they getting interviews with players? Are they getting Valorant content? Are they getting serious Valorant content or like serious Valorant content as in analytical? Are they getting serious like I'm playing well at Valorant? Are they getting I'm throwing at Valorant? Are they getting just random videos of like me dicking around in my day-to-day life? My YouTube channel is like a little microcosm of my brand, and my brand is a fucking mess. But I don't think I need to fix it. And the reason I don't think I need to fix it is because limiting myself to one brand image is not going to provide me more joy. It might provide me more success, arguably, but it's not going to find me more joy. Like, if I become really dry on the broadcast, then I think I've lost like 90% of what actually makes me a good broadcast talent anyway. And if I purely go for like I'm the funny guy, then I think there's a serious hole in the talent that I was previously helping fill with analytical content. So I don't feel like there's like the space even for me to choose one or the other right now, because I don't feel like that void would get filled by other people effectively. When I was on the... Now, that isn't the case all the time, though. When I do the Overwatch World Cup desk, for example, we pretty much doubled down on having Johnny be the straight guy, Reinforce be the straight guy, the guy that does the analytical stuff, and me and Bren doing mostly funny shit. And then we had Jonathan was the straight guy, Golden Boy's like the exasperated host, and me and Bren are kind of the comedic relief, which worked really well. And the reason that worked so well is because I could rely on Jonathan to just do all of the analysis. Like, if there was some analytical point that I would have wanted to hit during the segment, he was going to hit it. I had full faith in him to be able to do that. And in theory, I can rely on Brent to do the comedy stuff whenever I want as well. But when it comes to like casting, I feel like I have to do a little bit of both with Bren as well, because you want to be able to have like banter that bounces off people. You don't just want to be super dry and have the other guy try and actually be funny and like a funny guy and a straight guy. I don't think that's the best case. It just makes it way too hard on the other person. And I also don't think that like I could exist without providing analysis in the duo, even though Bren does actually an incredibly underrated job of threading analysis into his play-by-play better than a bunch of other people that do Overwatch casting. Okay, so that's the kind of brand aspect of it. The exhaustion part of it, I actually enjoy making content. I love doing it. It's kept me sane during COVID as well. I found it recently when I've been forced to take a break, when I had no internet connection. I found it exhausting just doing that. Like, I felt antsy all the time. Like, I need a project to work on. That's my thing. And it's, you know, back in like 2012, 2014, it was trying to make the TF2 scene big and doing a bunch of stuff there. And then it's been like doing Overwatch stuff. And now it's doing a lot of Valorant stuff whilst maintaining the Overwatch stuff as well. There are occasionally times where I feel like making content is a little bit exhausting. Stuff like this, for example, that doesn't do particularly well on my YouTube channel, but people still, you know, ask for it, can be a little less rewarding, which is why I toned them down from being once a week to once a year, every February the 2nd, by the way. Tune in. But it's not overwhelming. I genuinely wish there was more hours in the day so that I could do more stuff. Like, I would love to do interviews with everybody across all the different scenes that I'm interested in. I would love to do analytical content that is like really well produced and pay for it to be well produced. I would love to do a bunch of like streaming all the time and just dicking around on stream. If I could do all of those things and like never sleep, I guess I would. I would want to do all of that stuff. It's just, I don't know. It's just what makes me happy. Okay. Captain James T. King followed up on that question to say, what direction do you see yourself growing in as a content creator? Is there a direction you want to focus more on in the future? I think 2021 for me is a year of focusing on Valorant content more so than anything else. I think I will be doing I will be doing, hopefully, assuming that I'm successful in renegotiating a contract with the Overwatch League, I will be doing live casting for Overwatch League again in 2021. I will also be doing companion streams every time that the Overwatch League is live and I'm not broadcasting during 2021. I'll be doing plat chat, a shit ton of it for Overwatch as well. At least one a week for Overwatch, but probably 2 a week. But all of my spare time on top of that, I'm really going to be focusing on doing Valorant stuff, reviewing VODs, doing analytical content, talking with players, getting integrated into the scene. Like, I think that this year, that is my professional goal, is to continue with what I've done in Overwatch and accelerate the plat chat stuff because it's been extremely successful. But use all of my spare time that might have been previously used making analytical Overwatch content on my YouTube or making funny Overwatch streams and stuff. Instead of doing that, almost all of my spare time will be in actually doing analytical stuff or at least side content within Valorant. But I imagine that my time will be mostly spent doing Overwatch stuff, so don't panic if you're not interested in Valorant and you're watching this. But it'll fill the kind of off-season time. And the reason I say that is because as a content creator with Overwatch, there's a ceiling unless you can spend a huge amount of time streaming the game. Like, in order for me to grow as an Overwatch content creator, I would have to be spending all of my spare time not casting Overwatch, making Overwatch content. And I don't want to do that because that would require me to give up entirely on Valorant. I wouldn't have time to be able to watch VODs. I wouldn't have time to be able to follow the scene. I wouldn't have time to be an expert in 2 esports at once. So if I wanted to grow the stream at all, I would have to be playing prohibitive amounts of Overwatch, which isn't a direction that I want to go in. I don't think the growth opportunities would be large enough. Like, what? At the end of 2021, maybe I'd have like 2K viewers at best case scenario when people tuned in. Is that worth missing out on an entire esport for that could be like a secondary source of income in the future, or even a pivot point if Overwatch ends up declining or for whatever reason they don't want to work with me again in the future? I don't think that that's worth it long term from a career aspect. It doesn't make sense to me. And then the other thing that I wanted to do as well is focus much more on plat chat. Like, the content creation aspect of plat chat is the algorithm loves the channel in terms of the content that we're creating as all one kind of focus, unlike my YouTube channel. The content is engaging for me to make. It's not weird, dumb clickbait content. It's actually analytical and a lot of talking heads and has good production value. All of the people that are involved in it are really passionate about making it succeed. And we've spent a lot of time, money, and we've got sponsors. So it's actually been very profitable for us too. So those are the 2 things, like plat chat popping off in 2021 and making sure that I can continue producing Valorant stuff at the same time as sustaining Overwatch. I don't think it makes sense for me to like go all in as a streamer. I did consider that actually. Mr. X was trying to get me to do it because this was back in the beginning of 2019, right? When the companion streams were first popping off and I had like 3K, 4K viewers for the companion streams in February, March 2019. Some of the Overwatch League talent, including Mr. X, were saying that I should just quit casting for the Overwatch League and try and become a full-time streamer and springboard off that success. In some sense, similarly to how Courage JD did it in Call of Duty, where he was previously a broadcast talent and then springboarded his streaming success into being a full-time content creator. personally, that doesn't appeal to me. I never went into that aspect because I don't want to be a full-time content creator. I don't want to just be riding the wave of the next big game to try and make it as a streamer. I know that there's a lot of money in that, but that's not what makes me tick. I enjoy streaming a lot, but I wouldn't want it to be my primary revenue source. It's unreliable. You have to ride the whims of the viewers, and it's not a project that you can sink your teeth into in the same way that learning an esport is. I really love the learning process. Okay, Xathon says, do you still enjoy playing Overwatch? That's a really interesting question, actually, because I'm not sure there was ever any time in, like, since 2016, since the game was out, I don't think there's ever been a time where I loved playing Overwatch. There have been many times where I've loved watching Overwatch, but have I ever really loved playing Overwatch? I don't think so. I mean, I thought it's always a fun game to stream because I'm just kind of dicking around, but I don't think I've ever like been caught by the playing Overwatch bug. To me, the game, it's not my kind of game to play. I love watching it. I love broadcasting it. But to play the game requires, I mean, I am a fucking tunnel visioner. I will tunnel vision on something worse than you could possibly imagine. I can only pay attention to what's right in front of me. I have no situational awareness, and my positioning is normally horrible in fast-paced games. When I play like card games and stuff, if they're fast-paced card games, I'm awful at it. But if they're about strategy and they're slow-paced, I can be good at them. So I don't think Overwatch was ever really the game for me in terms of being a player. TF2, by the way, was really slow-paced compared to Overwatch. The team fights were calculated and drawn out, even though the individual team fights themselves, once you were in them, were kind of fast-paced. It was somewhat simple and formulaic compared to how much of a flow state you have to be in to be good at Overwatch. So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason that I've never been good at Overwatch as well. I had like a bronze border account up until a couple of months ago because the only times I ever play Overwatch is when I stream it, which is like the opposite of people like Jaws, for example, who hardcore grind the game, love playing the game, and that's where their joy for watching the game comes from. For me, my joy for watching Overwatch does not come from playing it and being in love with the game itself. It's that I enjoy seeing it played at the top level and seeing like the strategy and the best players in the world. In this same kind of vein, babybwu asked, you love CS, but you're hardcore addicted to Valorant, and it's the first time this has happened to you with a game in forever. What do you love about Valorant so different to CS and everything else so far? What's the magic? The magic for me in Valorant is that the strategy components are simple but very effective. It has a pretty high skill floor, but a high skill ceiling as well. So once you've learned some basic ways of using an agent, you can be really effective. Like you don't even have to have the best aim in the world, but you can be really effective. And that jives with somebody like me because if it's a game like CS where you're taking aim duels all the time, there aren't that many tools to set yourself up for favorable aim duels. Obviously, you can rely on really good positioning and reads of your opponent, but you also, at some points, you just have to take straight up aim duels. And also you can rely on like good pop flashes and stuff like that. But the problem with the utility usage in CS is that you have to nerd out. You can't just jump casually into CS. Even me, who watched the game all the time, you have to go and learn lineups. You have to literally sit there and learn lineups to be effective at a very basic level in CS. Like if you 5-stack in CS, if I 5-stack right now, I'd be shite at CS because if I'm playing on like Mirage, for example, I don't know any smoke lineups to cover jungle or to cover CT when I'm pushing A. I don't know a smoke lineup to smoke mid. And if I play against someone who does, I'm going to lose in ranked 100% of the time because that is just an overwhelming knowledge advantage. That doesn't really apply in Valorant. There are some nerdy lineups for sure. You can get some like nerdy recon dart and shock dart lineups and this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you just pick up Sova and you just recon dart a wall that's behind the players as you push, you're still going to get huge value with that agent. And if you boom bot and you just put it through a doorway instead of having some nerdy lineup with it, you're still going to get huge value with that agent. Maybe it'll start to become prohibitive in like the Diamond Plus level, but Diamond Plus is like a hugely high rank. So the skill floor is already much more accessible for someone who doesn't want to spend a huge amount of time learning the micro in the game. And to me, what I love learning in games is the macro. That's what always attracts me. And now let's move on to that, because the macro in Valorant, my God, the skill ceiling is so high, and the potential for elaborate sight takes is really high. Whereas in CS, a lot more of the game is about feeling out your opponent, using smokes to like take an area, and then having a couple of small executes with flashes and taking the aim duels favorably. Whereas in Valorant, you are coordinating so many different pieces of utility, and set plays like that are my lifeblood. That is what I fucking love in games. You'll be able to see it if you've watched any of my analysis content for Overwatch. I normally focus on cool set plays that, all right, maybe you couldn't replicate it in your ranked games because the pros are too good at it, but it's when all of the pieces work like cogs in a machine, like clockwork together. I'm not really bothered about the like scrappy plays where it's an incredible reactive play. Those are kind of cool, but if you come in with a game plan, with a tactic, that's what I love. And that's why I'm properly addicted to Valorant at the moment, because it's strategically so much deeper than Overwatch or even Counter-Strike. I think tactically it is deeper than Counter-Strike. While the skill ceiling might not be higher in terms of like the mechanics of the game, the tactical and strategic skill ceiling does appear to be higher. I'm not saying it's harder or easier to be good at the game. I think it's probably harder to be good at CS, considering how long it's been around and how demanding all of the tiny mechanics are in the game. But the potential for elaborate, coordinated strategy and tactics is enormous. It's absolutely enormous. And that's the kind of stuff that I live for. Now, what else was I going to mention as well? I think, yeah, the other thing as well, though, is that despite what the developers might say, Overwatch was never built as an esport. I just refuse to believe it. Like, there was no kill feed in the game at the beginning. The game itself is not a great... It's like... yeah, I think Overwatch League has made it into a very good esport, but the core game fights at every moment against its esport aspirations. Like the amount of knowledge that you need of what the heroes do in order to understand the game itself, the amount of different game types that you need to understand, the knowledge you need to be able to understand even the very basics of what's going on in a Overwatch game is very high. It's an extremely difficult game to teach your grandma. CS is on the other side of that. CS is a very easy game to teach your grandma. We're looking through the eyes of one of the players. If they shoot them in the head, pretty easy. Anyone who's ever played a video game can understand that. And all of the extra depth you can get layered on top over time. You can still enjoy the game and still get all of the tension and wonderful aspects of every round-by-round basis just based on that. Valorant is much closer to CS, though you do still have to understand what the agents do in order to understand why they're moving around the screen and like how they can just suddenly, I don't know, summon a bow and arrow out of thin air instead of their rifle. You know, these kind of things do require knowledge of what the agents do. But the game is still somewhat understandable from a core gameplay mechanic. And also, what Valorant has done very well is copy what makes CS an incredible esport, which is that at all times during the game, the downtime that people talk about, the reason that Overwatch players believe that Valorant is a boring game, the downtime always has one team against the clock, and that creates tension, and it creates this... when you're watching, it creates this natural tension and excitement for plays that are about to happen. There's a rhythm to the game of tension, 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 and then all the tension getting broken as the kills happen and the round is won. And that kind of up and down flow of CS has transported very nicely into Valorant. And that's what makes these amazing moments so amazing. In Overwatch, it's not a game around tension or rhythm. it's team fight, team fight, team fight, team fight, team fight, team fight. And that's it. The entire game is just a series of team fights. There's very little skirmishing and 1v1s that happen. It's mostly just a series of team fights that happen around different areas of the map based on different objectives. And there isn't the same level of narrative tension during the game that lends itself to be a good esport. It just doesn't exist within the core game that they built in Overwatch. And I've been missing that, I think, which CS definitely provided, but CS has such a large barrier to entry in terms of like knowing the history of all of the players, knowing the history of all of the teams and the tactics they like to run and the stars of them, and was this player good back then, and if he picks up the AWP, has he played that before, and like all of that kind of stuff. Whereas if you get in on the ground floor of a game like Valorant, you can know everything about every relevant player, same as people that have been around in the scene since the beginning. Okay, moving on. Priest asks, when you ask Valorant events for permission to co-stream them, do they ever ask for anything back outside of branding your stream? Access to your viewer numbers, data, or feedback on their production or anything? I wish they asked for feedback on the production or anything like that, but they do normally ask for statistics afterwards, yes, because the way that these things tend to work is that they gather all of the viewership data for the co-streams as well as the main broadcast, and they add it all together. Which is, for example, how we reached 300,000 viewers concurrent for First Strike finals, because that, a significant portion of that viewership was watching the co-streams on Ninja and Myth's channel for North America. And yeah, those viewer numbers are really important to report back to sponsors, because that at the end of the day is what is going to get you money. And it definitely is additive to the viewing experience. A lot of people extra tuned in to watch those games because of the co-streams, and that feedback, that data then gets fed back to the tournament organizer, who can feed it back to their sponsors and say, X amount of people watched our broadcast that had your advert in it. This is the amount of average minute audience. This is the watch hours or whatever else they're selling. RSW Reese says, I'd like to know how you feel about streaming. What parts of it do you find enjoyable, and how do you keep motivated to stream? Are there any obstacles you've faced? I mean, the obstacle at the moment is I lack internet connection. But the other obstacle that I've faced is that streaming is always the last priority for me. I need to watch all the VODs for my job. And so I have to spend all of my time watching every VOD that exists of Tier 1, Overwatch, and Valorant. That takes way more time than you would think it takes. It is a silly amount of time. Most people that follow scenes don't watch all of the VODs, even of the Tier 1 tournaments. Like, there's a lot of casters in the Overwatch League that don't watch all of the Overwatch League broadcasts. They'll watch, like, highlights of certain broadcasts to catch up on it if they don't think the regular season game is that important, or they're not scheduled to cast that team for 3 weeks, so they're not going to catch them in that meta, so it's not important. But because I work on Plat Chat and I'm talking about stuff all the time, and because I'm working on broadcast for everything, and because I like to know everything because it could be relevant down the line later on, I like to watch all of the VODs of the Tier 1 competition. So that takes a lot of time. And once you factor in then also recording content for like Plat Chat stuff and also doing broadcasts for the Overwatch League, streaming kind of takes the back seat. And then, other things that I do in my spare time, like trying to learn guitar at the moment because I just bought a new guitar, takes the back seat to even that. So that is definitely an obstacle in keeping up a regular stream. And my goal with the stream is really just to keep it ticking over rather than be a huge streamer, because it doesn't make sense with my current career. It's very important for branding, but it's important to just keep it kind of ticking instead of keep it growing, because it would just take way too much time to make it grow. What parts of it do I find enjoyable? Pretty much all the parts. Are there any parts I don't find enjoyable? Sometimes I feel an obligation to start playing you'll see this with start playing Overwatch and then transition into another game instead of just starting with the other game right from the beginning. I used to do that a lot more in 2020, where I would start by playing Overwatch and then I'd move into playing, I don't know, Among Us or CS or Valorant or whatever the hell I was playing, Worms Reloaded at the time. Now I just fuck it, I just play the game that I want to play. The reason that most people do it, like you'll see Super do it as well, where even though he wants to do a variety stream, he starts off by playing like 2 to 3 hours of Overwatch. The reason is that when people see Super's live playing Overwatch, that's what they that's where you get the majority of your viewers. And then you can kind of entice them to stay around if you transition into another game. But if you just start with another game and it pops up and it says Super's live playing Dark Souls or whatever, he still gets a lot of viewers that watch that, but he doesn't get as many as if he plays Overwatch. So some people don't tune in like right from the beginning. So that's just like a classic thing that all streamers face that are known for a single game and are trying to transition into doing variety content. But at the end of the day, I mean, at some point you just got to bite the bullet and do the variety content. And I think that at some point, if you kind of train your viewers that you do variety content, it sinks in. But I do generally enjoy streaming. I love doing it. Like I said earlier when I was answering one of the other questions, if I had enough time to do all of the things that I love doing career-wise and also stream 8 hours a day, I think I would do that. Like maybe I wouldn't stream 8 hours every day, but if I had the choice to do everything else that I currently do and also stream at least 4 times a week, 8 hours each time, I would do that. Totally. Like, I don't think I would get burnt out doing it either. I just love doing it. I love talking to people. I love performing for people. I love playing the games and chatting to people. I love having the little community that I've built. Yeah, it's fun. I can't really think of anything that I don't enjoy when it comes to streaming. What do I not enjoy? I mean, sometimes when I feel like obligated to play longer than I want to or something, but I don't know. Generally speaking, love it. Baby Blue says, how much would you have to sacrifice to hit Immortal in Valorant? I don't think I'd have to sacrifice anything. I think it's very doable for me to make Immortal in Valorant. I think I just have to play the game more. If I played the game in all of my spare time that I had, like every time I streamed, okay, sometimes when I stream analysis stuff, but if every time I was on stream playing a game, I streamed playing Valorant, I think I would be immortal if I just put, after a couple of months. I think you can do that without having the greatest aim in the world. I think I've been Diamond 3 before, like up and down, but I've never actually made it to immortal, but I think it's very doable. And also, what is one sick mechanical skill shot or play that you could never do that you always wish you could? Raise double satchels, Genji ghost dash, etc. I've never really given a shit about like mechanical skill shots in Overwatch. Because again, I've never been like hit with the bug to get good at Overwatch. And in Valorant, it's not like I never could do something but wish I could. I'm sure I could do whatever mechanical stuff like raise double satchels if I wanted to. I just have to test it out in a server a little bit. I just don't play enough raise. But I will say, if I go back to my TF2 days where I was actually competing and trying to be really good at a video game, it was really important in that game towards, I want to say this started in 2014. The scout players got so good that you would just get eaten alive unless you could hit direct rockets on them as a soldier, especially as a roaming soldier where you're not attached to your medic for heals all the time. And I am the kind of player that didn't really have the aim to be able to hit the directs on the scouts all the time. So I would just have to hit like splash damage on them. And for reference, it does like over 100 damage if you hit a direct rocket on them from close range. But if you hit a splash damage rocket on them, it does probably somewhere around like 60 to 70 damage, which means that, or maybe even less than that, especially if they're double jumping in the air. So they don't really, there's no way that you can hit splash damage on them. It would only be like 40 in that sense or something. And so what would happen is that I would get really frustrated playing against top level scout players because I couldn't deal with them because I couldn't hit the direct. Like you had to hit, it got to the point in TF2 where you had to hit like insane shots on these guys dodging through the air in order to be useful at all. Otherwise you were just a pin cushion that would get eaten alive by these scouts that just had medics attached to them running at you. Or double scouts that were just pushing you down, or like had the high ground and way more mobility than you. And when I would watch other pro players play, they were like hitting these nutty shots on them, and that's how they were dealing with them. And I was like, I can't do that. I'm just useless at the pro level now because the game has outpaced me in terms of the mechanics required. So that was kind of the point at which I benched myself and let them play with other people. So yeah, that's actually one thing that I definitely did want to do when I was playing not professionally, but like at the top level in a video game, was just be better and hit more shots. All right, that's an hour and 48 minutes, nearly an hour and 50 minutes of me answering various different questions. If you guys ever say again that I don't record subscriber or Q&As anymore, well, let it be known that you are liars and frauds. I do subscriber Q&As, and they are every single year on February the 2nd. Mark it in your calendars.